Our next speaker this morning is a professor at Pittsburgh's Carnegie Mellon University, and he runs the CMU Student Free Thought Group, and he's spoken at many national and local conventions. Please welcome Andy Norman.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
So, I'd like you to consider the fact that we are among the most reviled minorities on the planet. We have been for thousands of years, and despite some very promising and exciting efforts to sort of humanize and lighten up the atheist image, we face a very long road and an uphill battle, despite that. And we have to ask ourselves the question, why is such a humane and sensible worldview such a tough step? Let's be candid. The atheist brand sucks. In the public mind, we are like that curmudgeonly uncle who shows up and picks a fight about politics at the holiday dinner. We're viewed as crusaders intent on disabusing other people of their illusions, even their comforting and life-affirming illusions. We're viewed as the kind of people who find fault but are perhaps mildly challenged on the empathy front. We're the kind of people, or at least we're viewed as the kind of people who are annoyingly right or annoyingly have the best arguments again and again, and yet who seem to some degree tone deaf to the need for social amity. These are all major problems with the humanist brand. And the atheist brand is equally weak. In fact, you ask your average person, or you tell an average person, I'm a humanist. And what do they say?
What's a humanist?
What's that? Very few Americans even know what a humanist is. Our brand recognition is terrible. Even where awareness of what humanism is about is fairly widespread, we're viewed as basically kind of a watered down or friendlied up atheism. In fact, we ourselves, when asked to sort of explain what our humanism amounts to, given an elevator ride to explain what it is, we typically end up explaining what we're about with reference to atheism or a lack of supernaturalism within the first 10 seconds anyway, because we want somebody to get a quick and ready feel for what we're about, and before you know it, humanism and atheism are indissolubly linked in the minds of so many. So my claim today is that we're doing a lousy job of framing humanism, and that fortunately we are now, for the first time, in a position to do something fundamental about it. In fact, I think we can reframe what's at issue between us and between our worldview and the worldviews of our cultural competitors in such a way as to gain the upper hand in the so-called culture wars. I want to explain how I think we can do that. To do that, I have to tell you a little bit about something called mattering theory. So mattering theory was inspired by 2011 Humanist of the Year, Rebecca Goldstein, one of the most important philosophers alive, in my opinion. At the Women in Secularism conference a couple of years ago, actually, back up one second. Based on some suggestions Rebecca contained in a novel she wrote 30 or 40 years ago, the idea that researchers, scientists, can actually understand better what matters and how it is that people form their ideas about what matters. And we can subject this to scientific study. There are now psychologists studying how human beings think about how they matter, how they think about what matters. There are decision scientists and behavioral economists who are beginning to use the language of mattering to better understand human behavior. And there are a whole bunch of colleagues of mine at Carnegie Mellon University that are interested in a serious interdisciplinary research project to understand what it is that matters to people and what we can learn about the way in which we form and deform our picture of what matters. In fact, I don't know how many of you subscribe to the Humanist magazine, but I have a piece in the issue that just came out a couple days ago where I interviewed Rebecca Goldstein about her ideas on the subject, and it's a great way to get up to speed on mattering theory, so I recommend it to you if you, when that arrives in your mailbox. So, at the Women in Secularism conference a couple years ago, Rebecca Goldstein asked the following question. She said, what is it that keeps intellectually sophisticated people clinging to propositions about the world so improbable that they can be described, if you'll allow me to use the technical terminology of epistemology, as crazy-ass shit? It's funny, but it's a very good question. And here's Rebecca's answer. There's the irrepressible will active in religion that we've largely ignored. I'm talking about the will to matter. Here's the idea. Human beings have a profound need to feel as though their lives matter. When we feel as though our lives don't matter, we suffer acute anxiety, and we'll do almost anything to relieve that anxiety. We'll hurl ourselves on grenades, we'll fly airplanes into buildings, we'll burn witches, etc., etc., etc. The problem is that the world doesn't always cooperate with our efforts to matter. In fact, it has a frustrating tendency to erase and obstruct our efforts to make a difference. And certainly on a large scale. And when we're faced with this, what I call the mattering problem, the problem that it's hard to make a life that you feel really matters in some larger sense. When you're faced with that problem, there are two basic strategies you can take. You can honestly confront the fact that your life doesn't seem to matter very much and try to live according to the most honest conception of what matters that you can. That's very hard to do. Or you can lie to yourself about what really matters. You can delude yourself about what matters. And that's far, far easier to do. A good way to think about this is with the notion of a mattering map. Each of us carries around within us an understanding of what matters and of who matters. And we refer to this, so imagine a topographical map in your mind, that you refer to when you have to kind of make a rough and ready decision about what to do, and you actually have to gauge what matters, or make complex trade-offs between different things that matter to you. Each of us carries around within us an understanding, in some sense, of what matters, and it orients us and guides us in the world. These mattering maps are enormously resistant to change once you invest a portion of your life on the conception of mattering that you hold. So one of the hardest things in the world is to admit that you've invested a big chunk of your life on something that it turns out doesn't matter. Right? And by the way, it's not just the religious who have trouble facing that. We all do. And none of us is completely honest with ourselves about what matters. At the very least, we tend to care more about the things that we're good at, for example. Now that's maybe a permissible form of warping your mattering map, but it is in fact, I don't know that it even qualifies as dishonesty, but it's a way of manipulating your map of what matters so as to feel better about yourself. And none of us are immune to that. Now, I think this notion of mattering map gives us an extraordinary opportunity to understand religion in a new light, in a helpful light. Religions are fundamentally in the mattering business. In fact, they're the mega corporations of the mattering business. Religions meet members' need to matter through community. And I would argue that by providing community and fellowship, that's actually providing people with real mattering. Because one of the best ways to matter is to matter to someone who you care about. And religions, I think, are to be congratulated for affording people that dimension of mattering. But religions also indulge in delusional thinking in order to satisfy people's need to matter. They play pretend. They engage in extraordinary acts of pretense. Intellectually sophisticated people will pretend to know that Jesus was born of a virgin, even though they're capable of using the concept of knowledge with perfect correctness in other domains of their lives. It's a form of pretense. It's palpably involves pretense. Rick Warren, author of The Purpose-Driven Life, wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life that sold 30 million copies. You know what the central theme of that book is? You matter to God. You better believe Rick Warren has his finger on the pulse of what Americans need psychologically, and he's providing it. 30 million copies. Think about some of the central tenets of the Abrahamic faiths. We are God's chosen people. Well, surely if we're God's chosen people, we matter. God sacrificed his only begotten son for you. Well, if God did that, I must matter. You too can save somebody's soul by spreading the faith. Well, that gives me a way to matter. Religions are fundamentally about satisfying people's need for mattering, because the existential anxiety that comes with feeling as though you don't matter is just too impossible to contemplate. Now, the problem, of course, is that relieving your anxiety in that way causes you to deform or distort your mattering map in ways that can be morally disorienting. Think about how consistently the religiously devout are wrong about gay rights. How consistently they're wrong about women's rights. How long they defended slavery after more humanistically minded people started calling for slavery's abolition. Religions satisfy the felt need to matter by distorting mattering maps in ways that disorient us morally. And that's a very high price to pay for solving the problem in that way. In fact, I would venture to say that navigating this world on the basis of a pretense-based mattering map is kind of like trying to navigate New York City with a map of Middle Earth. Now, this notion of mattering maps also gives us a way to reframe what humanism is fundamentally about. Humanism is not at its core anti-religion. At its very core, it is pro-honest mattering. Our fundamental commitment is that we want people to honestly face what really matters and live accordingly. And that's a far more inspiring concept of what we're about than, we're a bunch of people who get together and kvetch about God. In fact, you look at almost all of humanism's core commitments, and they all function in the same way. Why do we insist on naturalism? Because supernaturalism is a common path to dishonest mattering. Why do we insist on our Darwinian origins? Because special creation is a common path to dishonest mattering. Why is the concept of human rights so central to us? Because dehumanizing others is a common path to dishonest mattering. Why are we leery of tribalisms of all kinds? Because tribal identities are a common path to dishonest mattering. And I can go on and on and on here, but all of the central tenets of humanism can be derived from a core commitment to honest, reality-based mattering. We want to put together a shared evidence-based picture of what matters so that we can get along together in this world and afford one another lives genuine rather than pretend matter. That's my claim about humanism. I would ask you to try on this conception of humanism for size, see how it suits you. We are the champions of honest mattering. We should take pride in that. Thinking of it that way, I believe, will bring clarity and coherence to your humanism. I think, like me, I hope, like me, you'll find it motivating to help us take this movement to the next level. I think you'll find, if you weave this into your conversations with friends, that it opens people's hearts and minds to what we're about. And I think we can use this to reframe the debate. If the choice between the humanist worldview and religious worldviews ends up being framed as a choice between honest and dishonest mattering, guess what, guys? We win. We reframe the debate in that way, we can win the culture war, and it doesn't have to take 2 more millennia to do it. Thank you.
You have time for 2 questions.
Is there a website or somewhere that you can go to essentially make your own mattering map? It seems like the type of thing that would be on the web somewhere.
Not that I'm aware, but I think that's a marvelous idea, and I'm looking for a collaborator on that.
Well, you should be able to find one at CMU. Yeah.
Well, so I can provide you with an infographic that shows how all of the central tenets of humanism add up to a big picture mattering map, a big picture reality-based mattering map. I can send you a PDF of that. It's expected to appear in a forthcoming issue of the Humanist magazine. Be on the lookout for that. But obviously this is just the start of a research project and a much bigger project that is ramified for generations. I hope you'll help us out.
I really like your idea about putting it in these terms of mattering. So I'm just wondering if you've come up with an elevator soundbite way of explaining humanism and those in that regard to help us to win the perception value.
Yeah, I've experimented with different ones, right? And had varying degrees of success. But I guess I would just say something like this. We humanists are aware that pretend forms of mattering have caused a great deal of suffering in the world. And that what we really want is to help all of humanity come to terms honestly with what matters so that they can live lives that are genuinely fulfilling without any need for pretense or delusion. I mean, that's kind of that's a bit edgier than some audience members would appreciate, but it's in the ballpark of what I hope will be useful. I've got some other ideas too.